Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcobo joins us now live from Parliament with the latest. Ziyanda, good afternoon to you. Just an hour and 48 minutes away from the start of what we expect to be the vote in Parliament. What's the latest?
Well, I can tell you, Stephen Groothuis, that the other GNU partners are backing the ActionSA proposal, the current fiscal framework, which was adopted and voted on in yesterday's Finance Committee's meeting, where, of course, you've heard the EFF citing a procedural issue there. It was also debated. We spoke to Joe Maswanganyi, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance, saying that, of course, this is a new territory, Stephen. That Money Bills and Related Matters Act has never been invoked. And so there were questions around Section 8, subsection 4, which was speaking about the fact that you can either adopt or amend the fiscal framework, but you can't reject it. And so that is the technicality that the EFF is fighting about. But ActionSA's proposal, Stephen, it's in two parts. They are talking about taking on, or adopting rather, pushing ahead with the 0.5 percentage points VAT hike, which is meant to come into effect on the 1st of May on condition that the National Treasury comes back to Parliament with revenue proposals of how they could plug this hole, which means they're in essence saying they're trying to ensure that this VAT hike does not come into effect by the 1st of May. So they're giving the National Treasury a lifeline, so to speak, and this is why then the ANC and IFP, followed through this. The second part is the issue around personal income tax and it being adjusted according to the country's inflation rates. They're basically, in simple English, they're trying to ensure that if, for instance, you get a salary increase, that you don't inadvertently get put into a higher tax bracket, which would basically put you on the back foot, because as soon, of course, as you go into a higher tax bracket, it might actually make you earn a much less salary. But let's speak to ActionSA themselves, whose representative on the committee, Alan Beasley, put forward that proposal. I mean, let's start off with how you came to this point. Who called who first between ActionSA and the ANC? And I mean, the Democratic Alliance is very upset with you right now.
Well, to answer your question, how we got here is the fact that the first budget presentation was aborted at the last minute, literally. And there, the Finance Minister had a 2% proposal to increase VAT. That was roundly and soundly rejected by everybody. And I went on the record on that day to say, we want the government to cut the fat and to leave VAT. Our position remains exactly like that. Then after 2 weeks, Enoch Godongwana came back with a 0.5% VAT increase for this year and another 0.5% next year. So essentially, he carved off 1.5% in 2 weeks. We are saying that that is an indication that you can carve off the other 0.5%. And that's why we've said to Treasury and in the committee yesterday, we made a recommendation, because if we had made an amendment, it would have halted this whole process again. We've already been in a state of flux for more than a month. The whole world's looking at us. We can't pass the budget. There's division in the GNU. And the reason we're in this mess is because the GNU can't find each other on this matter. So it's actually their problem. So we've come with a recommendation and a solution, and I'm very pleased to see that some of the political parties are coming out in support of it and saying that we can find this revenue. Edward Kiswetter, for example, the Commissioner of SARS, he says SARS can collect the money. We went to the Minister after the first aborted incident and said, we need more money for SARS, and he came back and gave an additional 4 billion rand. Now that's going to help. SARS is the main revenue collector in this country. They collected a record 1.8 billion rand in the last year, 1.8 trillion rand. Now, they have said that there's 800 million out there that they can collect if they're just given the means to do the collection. Now, we believe they've been given a lot of the means, not quite as much as they need, but certainly enough to fill the 28 billion rand budget shortfall. And of course, there are expenditure reviews that have been tabled year after year in Parliament that indicate where there's wasteful expenditure and where this government can improve on expenditure. And we're saying implement those and fund SARS and go and fetch the money. There is revenue there. Cut the VAT. don't touch VAT. And that is our position. Now, the DA is trying to construe it that we support a VAT increase. We absolutely do not support a VAT increase. It was conditional in our presentation in the committee. We said, don't increase VAT and don't allow personal income tax creep, which is taxation by stealth. As you earn more money, inflation goes up, the tax bracket isn't inflated, so you earn more money but you take less home. That's essentially what is really killing South Africans. And we're saying poor South Africans can't be made to shoulder a government that will not change its bad expenditure habits. So the government is going to have to change their expenditure habits, and they can go and raise the revenue elsewhere.
So when you were speaking to the ANC, what conditions did you put on the table? In other words, what do you as ActionSA get out of this?
Well, we've got a whole laundry list of demands that we want the minister to consider, and we're certainly going to give him that over the next month while he's considering how to improve revenue collection and adjust expenditure. We've got a whole long list of those things. But we said in the interest of putting this insecurity and uncertainty to bed, we will support the fiscal framework on condition that they go and reevaluate their position about VAT and tax. Now, we put South Africa first. We didn't put our own parochial interests first and say, give us more control of government, give us more control over the finances in this country. And I think, for example, the DA overplayed their hand and they got knocked back, and now they're livid because, you know, in poker, when you play the hands you've got in your card and you play the wrong hands, you can't say, I want to play it again. They played their hand, and it looks like they're not going to get the support that they thought they'd get. And that's what's happened, unfortunately.
Do you trust the ANC to live up to their word? Because in essence, because of the numbers, you've only got 6 seats here in Parliament, they've got 159. You also need to lean on them to ensure that their deployee in the National Treasury actually comes back with those adjustments, invoking that Money Bills Amendment and Related Matters Act.
Let's be very frank, the ANC suffers from a tremendous trust deficit in South Africa, and that's why their electoral support has declined so dramatically. The ANC have shown that they're not trustworthy, but I think they've learnt now that they don't have a majority, that they have to start working with other political parties. They found that almost impossible with the DA. I think they are poles apart and just can't agree. So the ANC will determine its own political future. If they renege on their undertakings to us now, they will be reneging in front of the whole of South Africa, because everybody knows now what the commitments were. Headlines of saying ANC supports ActionSA's demand for zero tax increase and no inflation taxation bracket creep.
Is this the start of a long-standing relationship? Perhaps if there's a reconfiguration of governments, that ActionSA jumps on board the way you've done in Tshwane?
Well, look, I've got to smile because our president was on record saying he'd never work with the ANC in 300 years. But, you know, the reality is that political chips fall, and once they've fallen after an election, that's the reality. Nobody has a majority. We have to start working with each other. We went into an agreement with the ANC and the EFF and other parties in Tshwane. Our mayor there, Dr. Nasipi Moya, is doing incredible work. Everyone wrote us off and said we were going to be disastrous. We're far from disastrous. We're building a shining city on the hill in the Union Building City, and we believe that we can work with other political parties, because essentially that's what defines South Africans. We've shown over and over and over again that we are best when we are collaborating and working together, and at our very worst when we are finger-pointing, carping, and working against each other.
What's the saying? One man's trash is another man's treasure. Looks like ActionSA is really willing to step in there, Stephen Grootes, as that divorce between the ANC and the DA is clearly on the horizon, if what we heard from Karabo Khachau is anything to go by. And of course, lots of talk is a reconfiguration of the Government of National Unity coming up if, of course, that budget, which is very likely, gets pushed through in its current form, the fiscal framework. That is, Rise Mzansi just releasing a statement a few moments ago saying that they support the fiscal framework. So is the DA isolated in this case, and what does that mean for the future of who governs this country? All will be unveiled once we get into the proceedings at 2 o'clock, just under 2 hours to go before those proceedings and that budget vote gets underway.